Greetings, my name is Chamomile, and this is an exploration of the entire galaxy sector by sector. Today, we're talking about the 5th Shadow Hand Command. Yep, all of it. Normally, an over-sector command like this is split up into multiple sectors, but the vast majority of deep core planets are uninhabitable because of how densely stacked the stars are. Like, the vast majority of planets in general are uninhabitable because they lack breathable atmospheres, but there's seriously only like 30 habitable planets in the entire deep core, that we know of at least. And this despite the deep core having a much higher density of stars than the rest of the galaxy. In fact, it's because it has a much higher density of stars. That's bad for planet formation, especially habitable planet formation. Most habitable planets in the deep core are at the fringes, with the only major exception being the Koros trunk line, which does go pretty deep into the deep core and includes the moderately well-known Empress Theta system, and most of it is carved out and given to Azor Hammer. The deep core is so sparsely populated that you'll find a lot of references to the 5th Shadow Hand oversector, which call it Sector 5. It's technically an oversector, but despite the huge amount of space it covers, in population terms, it's more like a big-ish sector than it is to even the second smallest oversector. There's a couple of fairly normal planets lying around Shadow Hand's oversector, like Bessero is a mining planet run by the Tag Mining Company. Dremulae is a beautiful resort planet, and legends say its Dremulaire plant can heal lightsaber wounds. That's pretty cool, but you tend to find a couple of cool things like that lying around any given sector, provided anyone has done any research into it at all, which isn't always the case. Primus Golud is an asteroid field that is allegedly a former planet destroyed by the first Sith invasion of the Republic, although our primary source on that is the Keldroma epics, which are heavily stylized, so grain of salt. The planet Calm is homeworld of the Calmites, who practice a culture of absolute conformity via extensive cloning and the enforcement of Calm's central population planning. Rumor is that the Republic commandeered Calmite cloning facilities to produce clone troopers during the Clone Wars, but officially all clones came from Kamino. I totally believe the rumors, though. Having a backup cloning facility at the edge of the deep core would enable the Republic to keep fighting in the event they lost access to Kamino, a planet in a satellite galaxy only accessible through the Outer Rim. Their control over Kamino was always super tenuous. A backup just makes sense. Volpter is a planet in the deep core, home of the Volpterine species. You might recognize the Volpterine pod racer Dud Bolt if you're a fan of the Golden Age of pod racing. Ojong is a planet in the deep core, home of the Basilisk species, who you might recognize from Pong Krell, the Jedi who betrayed the Republic to the Separatists on Umbara, or Dexter, who is made up. Obi-Wan Kenobi never publicly disclosed what contact had identified the Kaminoan Dart for him during the Clone Wars in order to protect their safety. He wasn't in a position to be making public statements in the Imperial era, and he didn't survive to the New Republic era when Baron Papanoida did a bunch of interviews with historical figures to get the details right. So, Papanoida just made someone up. If you ever thought that this diner seemed kind of out of place for its era, then yeah, they went out of style like 20 years before this film is supposed to be set. They were from Baron Papanoida's childhood, and he really liked them, so you can tell he's making up some details here. No shade on Papanoida, though. It's not his fault there was a hole in the historical record, and while this style of diner is out of date by the time the movie is set, by no means is it impossible for one of them to have held on past their heyday. And the Basilisk species are totally real. Like, obviously, Pong Krell is a moderately important historical figure. The Empire also maintained a lot of detention facilities in the deep core on planets like Callist 6 and Odic 2. Odic 2 is even technically the oversector capital, although with the Emperor's throne world of Biss nearby, that didn't really mean much. Yeah, the Sector Army headquarters was on Odic 2 and the Grand Moff lived there, but the concentration of both political and military power was in Biss. 5th Shadow Hand was a reserve force in the Clone Wars, being sent to reinforce other commands wherever they were needed, and they did continue doing that in the Imperial era, but their day-to-day duty during the Empire was guarding these prison planets. Deep core prisons are well within Imperial lines, so you don't generally get a whole lot of rebel bases anywhere nearby. That means any would-be rescuers have to travel further through core Imperial territory to reach them, which means more chances of getting caught along the way. At the same time, deep core worlds are out of the way. No one from the core worlds ever goes there. The Empire dropped the mask after a while, but especially in the immediate aftermath of the Clone Wars, Shadow Hand's deep core detention facilities were really important to keeping the Senate in the dark as to what the Empire was doing with their political prisoners. Dak Ralter, one of the pilots from the famous Rogue Squadron, was born on Callist 6 to parents who were imprisoned soon after the Clone Wars, and Dak became a prisoner by default because what were they going to do? Send him away from planet Gulag to tell everyone else about what was going on there? They probably could have gotten away with that if he was still a baby, but no one bothered, and at a certain point, it became a security risk, which is all the excuse the Empire needed to imprison a child for his parents' alleged crimes. Dak managed to escape, and it's no wonder he joined the rebellion afterwards. Some of the Imperials tried to consolidate around Deep Core territories after the fall of Coruscant. A meeting of about a dozen lesser Moffs at Sauce Beacon led to the one who called the meeting flooding the chamber with poison gas to kill them all, and that was pretty much the end of it. High Admiral Truton Teradoc allegedly ruled the planet of Hakasi for several years after the formal end of the Galactic Civil War, but despite how high his rank had been under the Empire, his forces on Hakasi were puny, and he ultimately worked out a deal with the New Republic to abandon the planet and take his forces to the Outer Rim. Another stupid move from Mon Mothma. The dude was a rat in a trap, could have just sent the Rebel fleet in to mop up his one Star Destroyer and half a Stormtrooper Legion, instead of letting those guys mass up with other Imperial remnants. Ooh, where did the First Order get all those Star Destroyers from? It must have been a hidden super factory in the unknown regions, or maybe Mon Mothma's kind of a moron. Organa for Chancellor. Anyway, the Deep Core is also home to all kinds of Force anomalies, including Tython, one of several planets that's supposedly the origin of the Jedi Order. Tython has two moons, Ashla and Bogan, which were aligned to the light and dark sides of the Force respectively, which means Tython is a whole mess Force-wise. If you're not Force-sensitive, though, it's just kinda fine. It's got lots of mountains, so if you like flying regular ground-hugging speeders, then I hope you like switchbacks, but that's about the only problem with it. According to legend, the ancient Jedi Order split into two over the followers of Ashla and Bogan. The Ashla won out, and that laid the groundwork for the Jedi as a light side tradition. I think it's worth noting that while the basic phenomenon of some uses of the Force causing a potentially dangerous excitement and acceleration of the energies is clearly real, most of the light side dark side divide is Jedi philosophy, and the most clearly identifiable dark side users are the Sith, who are a Jedi offshoot. Not from Tython, though. They schismed after the Jedi Order was located on Ossus, which might actually be the real planet of origin for the Jedi. The Jedi definitely built a lot of temples on Tython in the Old Republic era and officially considered it their Order's homeworld in that era, but they also claim to have rediscovered it after abandoning it for Ossus. I find Ossus to be by far the most likely planet of origin for the Jedi, but Tython isn't as ridiculous a Jedi origin world as Ahch-To, and it also definitely has a ton of Jedi sacred sites on it, dating back at least as far as the Old Republic era. So, while I'm skeptical that it's the first Jedi world, it is undeniably a Jedi world. There are some reports that the throne world Palpatine struck from was actually Biss, not Exegol. The Papanoida studio films from after Baron Papanoida's departure aren't as reliable as the ones he made personally, but they did have a dedicated field research team, so I'd be surprised if they were so vastly off the mark that they placed Palpatine's throne world in the outer rim of the unknown regions instead of the deep core. That seems more like the kind of mistake that rando serial fiction writers posting from the inner rim would make. No shade on those guys, I am a rando posting from the inner rim and run into the exact same research barriers. I'm just saying, as much as many of the details have been blatantly fictionalized, hyperspace ramming isn't a thing, I think we can trust the new films to at least be correct about the planet on which battles took place. Although, The Mandalorian is made by the same studio and uses the same research teams, and it refers to Tython being in the Outer Rim, which... No. I'm not an expert on Din Djarin, so I don't know if the events of this scene actually took place on Ossus, which is in the Outer Rim and would make sense, or if they actually went to the Deep Core, which would also make sense. It's not like Din Djarin was on the run from the New Republic or anything. He can pass to the core freely if he wants to, but either way, they either got the name of a planet completely wrong or the location of a planet completely wrong, so hey, maybe the events depicted as occurring on Exegol actually took place on Biss, and the research failure really was that extreme. Has anyone ever done an interview with this so-called field research team? Are we sure they're real? Rakith is a volcanic Sith world. It's way outside any of the boundaries of the Sith Empire, even at their maximum extent, but the Sith were extremely fractious, and it is really hard to stop five guys in a freighter going wherever they want, so Sith warriors on the wrong end of a power struggle would just gather up a few close supporters and fuck off to uncharted space. Sometimes Sith Lords would gather up entire colonial founding populations and plop them down on an uninhabited planet discovered by one of these walkabouts. So I have no idea when exactly Prakith was settled by the Sith, but at some point before the destruction of the Sith and the Ruusan Reformation, some guy named Darth Andedu built a fortress here, and the Empire later refurbished it because Emperor Palpatine wanted more garrisons between his secret throne world of Biss and the rest of the galaxy. There's also rumors of another Sith world in the deep core called Had Abaddon. If it exists, it was probably a colony of Prakith or vice versa, but it's not clear if it's real. The high number of gravity wells in the deep core means hyperspace lanes decay real fast, so while it's certainly convenient to say that no one knows how to get to the lost Sith world of Had Abaddon, it's also totally plausible. Biss was a secret throne world of Palpatine's, that much we know for sure. It was a planet steeped in the dark side which the Rakata had built temples on before the days of the Republic. When Palpatine rediscovered it, he turned it into a pleasure planet for his most loyal subjects, while secretly feeding off of their life force to extend his own life. This is similar to the alleged secrets of immortality found on Exegol, and not too different from Zakul, and it might be that people are getting which planet has this effect mixed up, but it might also be that lots of planets strong with the dark side have this force vampirism effect. And the thing is, Biss did have a significant population of Emperor Palpatine's most loyal subjects to feed off of, while Exegol usually had a skeleton crew of highly trusted military personnel. Biss's population was both much higher and also consisted primarily of people who had served their purpose in Palpatine's plans, whereas Exegol had a lower population and one that was still needed by the Empire going forward. It would have been a problem if the people on Exegol were constantly fatigued, got sick easily, and had a terrifyingly high incidence of cardiac arrest. Cracking Biss was always going to be a problem for the New Republic, since it was at the end of a tangled, narrow hyperspace route picking its way through the single most labyrinthine nest of gravity wells in the entire galaxy, nestled between thousands of black holes near the very heart of the deep core, and also the entirety of 5th Shadow Hand was stationed there, so there was an entire sector army to fight over one planet. Nobody liked leaving that dagger pointed at the heart of the New Republic, but also, nobody wanted to go and deal with it, especially since Biss had no hope of supporting the entire army by itself. You can see why this concentration of power as a highly defensible location made the deep core an attractive target to Imperials hoping to hold on to the Empire in the immediate aftermath of Jakku, but it was pretty easy for the New Republic to wall them in and wait for all their Star Destroyers to break down. So as much as I slag off the post-Papanoida film's accuracy on the historical details, I do think they got Exegol's location right. Not because their field research team seems super trustworthy, but just because it's much easier to keep a fleet operational while pillaging a bunch of unknown worlds in the unknown regions, rather than somehow smuggling in an entire fleet's worth of spare parts and energy cells into the deep core for 30 years of maintenance. I know I've talked shit about Mon Mothma for not being more active in fighting the Imperial Remnant, but the Biss strategy makes sense to me. The New Republic didn't just let them go, it walled them in and waited for their ships to break down. And I don't see why that wouldn't have worked.